going to share my screen here. So one of the basic functions within Oomph is animating pages. So you can animate pages. You can create a page name and name it to invoke an animation when it loads. So if we have a look at example 1 here, we'll see that we've got 2 pages here called L1-3 move in from right and L1-3 move in from right for the 2 folders Orion and Borneo. So when this page loads, it uses the default setting within Oomph for the animation. I'm just going to open up Wolfbox. And for those of you that aren't using it yet, it's a great little tool for previewing work that you're doing. I'm just going to zoom this down so we can see it in the window. And I'm going to give it a rotation. And we'll just scale it up a little bit here. So if I take this example, example 1, and I drag it onto Wolfbox, we'll see what I mean. So as I slide across, we're going to see the page animate in. Okay, now we can create a custom animation by creating a .anim file that defines how the animation plays. So to create an animation file, I can simply download one from the wiki and then modify it. So for instance, in this folder here is an anim file. If I open it with text edit, basically you can see what we've done is we've changed the duration and the type of entry it does and the position it's coming from. So I'm just going to change this and make this a 4-second introduction. And then I'm going to take that animation folder and drop it inside each of these pages. So I'll just option drag that and put it in the Orion one. Okay, and we'll reload that. And now what happens is we have a much slower animation. What you may not know is that you can apply a .anim file globally. So for instance, if I take this animations from here and drag it to the top level, and I delete the one from Borneo, we're in them, but in the top level is an animations. And if I do the same thing now, if we drag it into here, we'll see that even though there isn't a local animations file, both of the pages are using this global animation. In fact, what it is, animations in the top root is actually a shared asset. So all of the methods of creating shared assets, this is the simplest one, and this is the one that we've probably been using and you've probably used yourself. So how can shared assets help us become more efficient and speed up production time? So let's start by looking at what we mean by a shared asset. So basically, a shared asset is a means of sharing content between sections. In the same way that an InDesign or PowerPoint master page can contain elements which are repeated on each page of a document, such as a header or footer, shared assets in Oomph can do the same thing. Shared assets can be defined as one of 3 definitive types: layers, objects, or animations. So we've just seen how animations work. So let's take a look at shared layers. Unlike typical master pages that sit at the bottom of a page, a shared layer in Oomph can be thought of as a regular page created for a section in your project. And this is where shared layers are incredibly powerful. A shared layer can be implemented in a section of any layer. I'm just going to come into here and we'll take our example 1. Okay. So this is example 1. I'm just going to move that animations folder into there. And I'm going to duplicate that, and we'll call this example 2. Let's just open that up so we can have a look and see what's in there. So what this means is that we can have a section folder containing only a P1-2 PDF and a P1-4 PDF, and we can use shared layers for the P1-1 and the P1-3 positions. Okay, it maybe sounds a little bit confusing, but if we take a look at the file, we'll see how it works. Shared layers, remember too, shared layers are created using the same workflow and file naming convention as regular sections. Just like sections, they contain layered numbered files for portrait or landscape, and they also refer to animations. So if we look at these pages, let's identify some candidates for shared layers. So I'm just going to open the file structure here so we can see what's inside it. So in this example, aside from the cover, I've got two sections, 20-Orion and 30-Borneo, that use a common design layout. Okay, so once again, if we go back to here, you'll remember that this is the Borneo one. We've got a picture, we've got these little graphics on top, and here's the Orion one. Those sections have unique content as well as content that's common to both. For example, the L1-1 page, if we look up here, is unique to each. The L1-2 page is common to both. The L1-3 contains a header and body copy unique to each section. The L1-4 contains a hyperlink, and you can't see it on there, that is used to load the pop-up widget and is common to both sections. And then finally, we've got the animations folder, which we've already shared. Depending upon the content contained within these layers, for instance, if the layers contain large graphic images, the layers can be quite large. This adds a significant amount of size to your project and makes your download larger. So how do we go about creating a project with shared assets? Okay, so I've copied the example one and we've named it version 2, and I'll use it to create a version with shared assets. We've identified the layers that are common to both the Orion and Borneo folders. Once again, they're L1-2, this one, L1-4, and the animations. So, this is how we create shared layers. In the top level, I'm going to create a new folder called Shared. Okay, so we'll start with the easy one and we'll just drop the animations inside there. Now I'll create a new folder within Shared called Layers. And I'll just drag it into there. So in order to identify and assign shared layers to section folders, I need to put them into a folder with a unique name. So I'll create a new folder, and I'm going to call it GR over for grad overlay. And I'm going to put that inside the layers folder. So now I've got shared layers and a folder called GR over. So all I need to do now is drag the L1-2 and the L1-4 files from Orion into the shared folder. I don't need them anymore in the Borneo folder, so I'll take those two and delete them. So how do I assign these shared layers to the Orion and Borneo folders? It's really simple. In the style of Oomph where naming conventions rule, I simply add after the section folder name, so for instance here with Orion, I put a space and then I put a pipe symbol or the vertical bar. That's the little one above the return key. So you hold down Shift and you put the pipe in, you put another space in, and you put the name of the shared folder in. In this case, GR over. And that's it. Now, what will happen is that when this loads in oomph, it'll go to the shared folder and find those two layers, and even though they're not on the bottom, they'll actually insert those into the correct area. Now, because I haven't done it to Borneo, it won't work on the Borneo one. So let's take a quick look at that. I'll just move this out of the way. We'll drag this onto Wolfbox. So we'll see that work there. We can see the graduation. There's a link in there. If I do the second one with Borneo, you'll see that there's no graduation there. And there is actually no link that when I tap on there, nothing happens. If I come back to this one, because remember the link is on a shared layer as well, when this comes in, I tap on there, it'll bring up the pop-up. So now if I want to assign those shared layers to Borneo, I just do the same thing. I come in here, I put a space, I put a pipe, another space, and then I use the words GR over. And it's as simple as that. Now if we come and look at our example 2 again, so there's our Orion page, and there's our Borneo page, with those shared layers in place and active. Here's a little tip for you. What I'm going to do now in GR over is I'm going to change the layer that has the hyperlink, because it's going to always be the top layer. I'm going to rename this to 100. The reason for this is that I always want this file to sit on the top. So by naming it a large number, it means I can add additional layers under it, either in the shared layers or in the section folder, without having to change it. So by moving the common layers out of the individual pages, we can reduce the size down to just the size of one set of layers. So instead of having these repeated throughout my whole project, I only have one of each now. So this is an example of shared assets helping us to be more efficient by reducing the overall size of the project. So the more layers that we can pull out, the smaller the project will be. Now remember, we talked about the 3 different types of shared assets: animations, layers, and objects. So this is probably a good time to talk about the second item in our list of shared assets, and that's objects. You're all probably familiar with objects, and if you're at the webinar Action Hotspots, you'll be really familiar with them. But for those of you who may not know them, I'll describe what an object is. In a nutshell, an object's a rectangular region on a page that displays some content. If you're already familiar with in-page slideshows, you'll notice that objects are almost exactly the same. Let's take a look at an example of an object. And once again, I'm just going to drag this on top of Wolfbox. Okay, and what we've got here, not this one, and we'll come back to here, is a basic slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to quickly open this in InDesign. Okay, so at the moment, this is what my page looks like. It's a rectangular field with a hyperlink, and the hyperlink on it is IPS1. Just down here. Okay. So if I look in here in hyperlinks, you'll see that this is a hyperlink IPS1. So if we come back into our simulator, we can see that it's basically loading a slideshow. If I then come into this and change this from IPS1 to Object1, okay, this is what will happen. It will look exactly the same. It will load the first page of the slideshow, but when I go in to move it, the slideshow doesn't move. The page moves itself. So taking a rectangular form with an IPS1 and changing it to an object1 changes its behavior. So the specification and setup are the same, it's just that the difference is in the behavior. And most notably, an object will not respond to swipes like a slideshow does. One of the really good things about that is, though, is that we can then create additional interactive elements. So for instance, in this case, what I've done here is I've created 2 buttons. And in each button, I've added an action. So in here, you can see the action is object1 page equals previous. So what that means is that when I create objects, then I can do things like interactively move through those by creating buttons. So really, that's basically what an object is. Okay? It's similar to an in-page slideshow. It works in the same way, but it has different behaviors. So once again, the content can be images, PDFs, HTML or video, and they can be layered together to form a composite final result. Now here's a little tip. You don't have to call an object object1 or object2. In fact, you can name it anything you want. If you're using lots of objects, it can become difficult to remember what content actually goes in what object. It's much easier to call your object by a name that reflects what it does, such as button in or button out or fade in header, etc. You just need to make sure you don't use a word reserved by oomph, such as IPS. And if you're curious about what sort of words you can't use, a good idea is to really just go to the wiki and the hotspot link sheet, and pretty much anything that's down there named as a function are words you cannot use. Okay, so IPS, VIPS, S2, R3, all of those things. So don't use those to name your objects, but come up with your own unique names. Okay, now that we know what an object is, how can we share them? So let's come back to our example 2 and look at our pop-up widget in here. As you can see, the same background is used in both pop-up windows. But the content is unique to each of them. So in this case, we've got images of the ship. In this case, we've got images of Borneo. So if we want to create shared objects, this is the way we'll go about it. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and we'll call this example 3. And once again, these will be available up on the wiki for you to download and have a look at and examine once the webinar is finished a couple of days later. So let's open up example 3. And what we want to do now is create those shared objects. So I need to create a new folder, and we'll call this one Objects. And we'll put this inside Shared. So in order to identify and make shared objects available to objects, I need to put them in a folder with a unique name. So I'll create another folder, and I'll call this one Pop-up BG. And I'll drop that inside the objects folder. So I'll drag the s1-1.png from Orion into the pop-up BG, and because I'm going to be sharing them, I don't need it in the Borneo one, so I'll move that out. So now we're starting to build up a little list of shared assets in our shared folder. So how do I load the shared object asset into the Orion and Borneo folders? Obviously it's not a L1 or a P1, it's an S1. It's simple. I need to make an S1-1 PDF page for the pop-up 1 folder that has an object on it, named the same as the folder containing my shared asset. Okay, it's probably better if I actually take you through how we do that. So what we've got here in InDesign, this is my layout for the pop-up window. So originally I had the two elements together, I had the overlay on top. So basically what I want now is just an empty object that will load this file. So I'm going to come down here into the pop-up, unlock that, I'm going to turn off this. So at the moment my background has got this color in it, which is gold grey 60. I'm just going to delete that color out of there. I don't really need to, but for this exercise I will. And what I need to do now is I need to turn it into a hyperlink. I'm just going to drag it off there so I can see better. Okay, so to make a hyperlink, we select the field, we tap Make Hyperlink, and we want to call this one Pop-up BG. Okay, so this object is the same name as our folder, so therefore whatever content is in that pop-up BG folder will get loaded into this object. Remember to turn off shared hyperlink destination and say OK. So there's our background in there. Now once again, we can always come into here if we want and rename that hyperlink so we know what it is. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to File, export that to my desktop, into example 3, into pop-up, and I'm going to call that s1-1.pdf. And that will be, what range is that? Sorry, it's page 4. S1-1, save that, range 4, export. Okay, so now here in this pop-up, I've got this s1-1.pdf, which contains an object with the name pop-up BG. So it's going to look inside the shared folder, inside objects, for a folder called pop-up BG, and what is ever inside that folder will get put into this container. So we should actually test that now. So we've got our S1 there, we've got that one there. Remember in Borneo we haven't done this yet, so let's take a look and see what we get. Okay, so we'll come to Orion first. There's our animation. We tap on here. There's our pop-up with the gold background in it. So let's come across to Borneo. Do the animation. Tap on here. Now, I don't know if you can clearly see that on your screens or not, but that is a white background on there, not a gold. So because we haven't created this yet for the other pop-up, it's not seeing the shared object. So I'll simply come back into here, take that S1 from Orion, option drag it down to the Borneo page, reload that into Wolfbox. Now when we tap on it, now we've got a background in there that's a shared object. So once again, this is an example of shared assets helping us be more efficient by reducing the overall size of the project. A little tip for you, you'll notice that in here, I'm using a PNG file instead of a PDF field with a color in it. The reason for that is that the PNG is like the native format of the iPad and doesn't require any rendering or processing time. It appears very quickly. If I was using a PDF, the PDF would have to be rendered. So one of the things you might want to start looking at is using, where resolution is not a critical factor, is using PNG files to speed up the rendering process, especially when we're looking at iPad 3 rendering issues with memory. Okay, so we've looked at making the apps more efficient by reducing the number of assets in the project. I've shown you the difference between a shared layer and a shared object. I've shown you how to add share assets to your project. So let's take a look at how we can speed up production time. Once we've separated our unique content from the shared content, it means that changes we make on the shared content is reflected throughout the project instantly. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is duplicate example 3, and we'll call this example 4. So I'm going to open InDesign. So let's open 4 here. So what we want to look at are these 2 pages here, L1-2, and the pop-up background. So let's start with L1-2. So I'm going to come into InDesign. Come down to my Orion page. I'll come to my first page here. And this is where I have my gradation. Okay, so it's this little rectangle here. It's using the cold grey at the moment. In fact, I don't need an outline on that. So what I want to do, let's say for instance I've got this shared layer applied to 30 pages throughout my project, and in one go I want to change the colour of all the gradations throughout them. Because we've separated our unique content from the shared content, it means that changes we make on this shared content is reflected throughout the project instantly. So I'm going to change the colour of the graduated file from gold 60 to this black with yellow. And I'm going to export it over the top of the existing p1-2.pdf that's inside the shared folder. So we say File, Export, come to my example 4, come to my shared layers. L1-2 is my graduation, so I'm going to save this, replace it with page 1. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I turn off the hyperlink, because remember the hyperlink is on another layer that's on the L1-100. So we'll export this to L1-2, hit save, replace it, branch 1, export it. If you ever come across this, it's a bit of a pain, isn't it? So we'll do that again. Adam says the video is lagging a little bit. Okay, I'll slow it down a fraction. I just ran into a thing where sometimes when you've got these pages open and you try and export over the top of it, it actually won't do it because it sees that the page is already open in another application. So in this case, I'm just going to call it L1-2-A. And it just means that I'll need to come into my folder, and I'm just going to drag this one out to the desktop and change that there. Okay, so now we've got a folder that's got this gradation on it. If I come back into here and I drag example 4 onto here now, you can see that it's gone much darker. In fact, it wasn't actually the right colour I wanted. I actually wanted it quite black. So I'm just going to come back into here and we're just going to stick black in there. And I think I may have yeah, there we go. Make a big negative difference. I'm just going to export that one again. We'll do the same thing. I'm just going to move that one to the trash, change this one to 2. Now we can see that it's a very dark gradation. I'm going to drag that onto Wolfbox. And there we can see that we've changed that on the Borneo file, and it's instantly changed it on the Orion file. So by changing one file, we can affect a whole number of files and a whole number of sections and pages throughout our project. The issue is that the pop-ups are still using the gold coloured background. So now we want to change the object as well. So once again, I come back into my InDesign folder. I come down to where my object page was. I hide that background. I'll take this page now. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that it doesn't have the hyperlink on it. And I'm just going to make that black as well. Now, one of the cool things about InDesign CS6 that I'm using is the ability now to export files as PNGs, which is great. So in the shared objects, in my pop-up BG, I'm going to change that and save it out and replace it as a 72 and the range is 4. We come back now and I drag it onto here. Because we've changed the PNG now, now we have a black background on the pop-ups. In fact, we can go one more level and we'll come into animations. And I'm going to actually change the animation now. I'm going to open it with text edit. And instead of coming in from 1024, I'm going to actually bring it in from the left. And we're going to bring it in from, say, minus 500 to 0. We'll save that. We'll drag it on top of here. See, I probably need to push it out a little bit further, so let's just open that. We'll bring that in from 600. Okay, so there I have animations that are coming in from the left. So in one go, or in 3 little goes, pretty much what I've done is I've changed the whole structure of this small file. Obviously, we're only working on a couple of pages, but it just gives you an idea of the power of shared assets, is that once you start to sort of think about separating unique content from common content, it just increases your productivity dramatically. I think there was a question here. Hang on a second. Can GR over be applied to specific pages instead of the entire folder article? It's only applied to the specific section. It depends on where I do it. At the moment, I've got 2 pages in GR over. I could split those out into separate ones. We're going to do some question and answers at the end, so I'll go for about another 5 minutes, and then we'll have a look at that and go through those questions. One of the things that you have to remember, there are a number of conditions that apply when using shared assets. And I've made a little demo project that I'll put up online that you can have a look at that'll take you through those conditions. I'm just going to load it into here. And we'll just reverse it. So this is a little project that you'll be able to download that sort of introduces all the things about shared layers and the conditions they apply to. So if we look at this page here, in a standard project, this is sort of how it looks. There's a B1-1, a B1-2, B1-3. So you've got the B1-1 is the background, the B1-2 is the paper, B1-3 is the menu bar, the B1-4 is the section highlight, the B1-5 is the scroll arrows, there's a VIPS1 folder for the scrolling area, a pop-up one, and an IPS1 folder. So these are the elements that go to make up this page. By using shared layers, what we can do is we can pull out a number of those pages. So for instance, B1-1, we can pull out B1-2, B1-5, B1-50. Now what happens though if if I've got a folder with a number of, or shared layers with a number of objects in it, but I only want to use one specific thing in an area. So for instance, if I come to this next page, what you'll see here is that there are overriding shared layers. And I'm just going to open up the conditions folder so we can take a look at that. So here's my folder. So in the introduction, you can see that the introduction section has a number of these different shared layers attached to it. I'm attaching the shared layer background, paper, scrollers, and menu. Okay, so down in here, background, menu, etc. is being applied to it. Because in the 20-intro there's only a B1-51, all of these shared assets are being applied. However, if we come to 30-override, this one already has a B1-1 in the form of this background. It already has a B1-50 of the menu bar. Okay? Now, so what happens is though, even though I have a background shared layer applied to it, because there's a B1-1 already in that folder, that takes precedent. Okay, so basically what Oomph does, Oomph looks inside the folder first and sees if there's a file there. If there's no file there, it looks inside shared to see if there's one that needs to go in there. If it finds one already in the folder, it will use that one first. Okay, so what's happening in this section, okay, I've got these files here, but the shared layers are still being applied to it in terms of the paper. There's no scrolling field needed for it and stuff like that. So some elements are being applied. Now here's an interesting one. Here's a folder, or here's a background one. So in this section folder, the folder itself has a name that matches a shared layer folder. Okay, so we've got a folder called 40 background, and we've also got a shared layer called background. In this case, the 40-background overrides the shared layer. Now the next one again is even more interesting. This one has nothing in it. This is a completely empty folder. But when I come to that page, this is what I see. So the whole page, the whole section is being made completely from shared assets, which is really interesting. So you can have a completely empty page and just apply all shared assets to it. We can do multiple page sections. So here's a page that has 2 pages using shared assets from both sections. So we can see here we've got background, background 2, paper and menu. 3 pages, the same sort of thing. So here we are, we're creating a mix and match of different elements, some shared, some inside the folder. And then there are some conflicts between shared layers, and a situation might arise where there are multiple shared layers that each contain an asset with the same name. Okay, so if in conflict 1, conflict 2, and conflict 3, okay, I've got a B1-4, a B1-4, and a B1-4, the first folder in that naming list is the one that's being used. The conflict 2 and conflict 3 aren't being seen at all. So there's different ways of, different conditions that apply when you're using shared layers. One last little tip that I'm going to show you is if we close this up here, and I come back to my example 3, and let's say we're building a primarily landscape landscape project. We end up with this, portrait version where we've got to sort of rotate to view the orientation. So we come down here, it's fine. What I want to look at is a quick way of creating what we call a default page. So inside example 3 here, very quickly in shared, inside layers, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it default. And inside that, I'm going to put the page I have here, P1-1, which is this little page. It says, please rotate your iPad to view it. I'm just going to drop that into the default box. What that will do now, I'll close this up and we'll come back into example 3. It means that any time that I'm in portrait, I will see this page. So in here I've got 1, 2, 3 pages. Because we have a single page in the default folder, anytime I rotate, I get a default page for that orientation. Okay, so that's an overview of how shared assets work inside OOMF. It's really well worth taking the time to play around with it. Download the examples, download the script, go back and play through the recording and have a look at it again and just try it yourself. And if you have questions, make sure you put them up on our forum. We're really happy to answer the questions and go through things there. You'll find that there's it's a whole new world that will open to you. There'll be things you can do that you've never thought of doing before. I've used it quite extensively inside the Armadale app in terms of moving bits and pieces around. Here's a schematic of one section, and I have 6 sections like this. All of the grey boxes are actually shared assets, and they contain the main underlying structure of the pages. So it's very easy for me to change the main object, to change the position of buttons that actually control the page. And if we were to look at the final thing of how it actually works, come back into here. So pretty much all of these buttons you see down here and the background and loading the panorama are coming from shared assets. So these little buttons, everything's being pulled up from those shared assets. Now I think we've got some questions. I'm just going to come out of here, stop the sharing, and we'll come back into here. Hide a few things. Just move this out of the way, like that. Okay. Lisa, do you?
They've all been answered.
Oh, they've all been answered?
Yep, just outstanding new ones.
Oh, okay, great. Just now, I think the colour flow in Finder causes a bit of a lag. Okay. Background. Anybody have any other questions? Nope. Okay, well, we'll get rid of this one. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our third webinar. And once again, I hope you've learned a little bit more about the awesome power that OOMF gives us to create outstanding tablet apps. In a few days, I'll be posting the files, scripts, and recording from today's webinar in our forums, and we'll post out an update when they're available.